for more on South Africa's economy contracting, we're now joined by Cosatu's Parliamentary Coordinator, Mtho, South African Chamber of Commerce and Industry President, Mtho Xulu, and Abigail Moyo, and who speaks for the Trade Union United Association of South Africa. Good evening to you all, and thank you very much for your time and for joining us tonight up here on In Focus. Let me begin with you, Mtho. The economy is not growing, and we seemingly are hoping for a miracle, as you're hearing there in that clip, to turn this economy around. We are not doing those things that needs to be done. Is government showing us consistently, as we look at these numbers, that it lacks the capability in the implementation of key policies that would see sustainable high economic growth?
Good evening, Tao. Good evening to your viewers, and good evening to my fellow panelists. Yes, well, look, these numbers, as much as they were expected, they continue to give us great concern as business because, we don't want to have it be in a state of a contracting economy. A growing economy is one of the things that we look forward to and we work very hard towards. But these specific numbers actually speak to your question that have we really put in the interventions that we discussed 2 years ago to really rethink this economy. And I think these numbers are a rude awakening that those interventions, if ever they were implemented, they have not yielded much results. Because actually now it marks exactly 2 years since the delivery of the economic recovery plan that we thought was supposed to reimagine and create a new normal for the South African economy. But these numbers don't lie, and they're a rude awakening that none of those interventions have made any significant impact. And we are actually not only reflecting on the fact that we are back to pre-COVID numbers, we are actually back to pre-COVID structural challenges to this economy. So indeed, the interventions that were discussed were not implemented, or even if there were some that were implemented, have not actually yielded any results, and therefore were in essence futile. And these numbers are an indication of that.
Abigail, in your statement as WASA, you're saying you note with concern the statistics that have been announced on quarter 2 of 2022 and the 0.7% contraction. Then you go on to say, Cabinet must take action. One would say, Cabinet has been taking action. Are we at a point where we are saying the action that they are saying they are taking is not enough? Or maybe the action, even the policies are too ambitious and will not work in the context of the structure of our economy in South Africa right now?
Good evening to all and my fellow panelists. To be honest, we are not saying that the policies that are in place and tabled by Cabinet are not working. All we are saying is that we want to see more action. We want to see a strategic plan being taken into consideration, because at the moment we have been struggling with unemployment rates, and the GDP is contracting, as we can also see, and as previously said, numbers don't lie. All we are saying is that Cabinet must look at doing things differently. Of course, everything has been tabled, everything has been tried out, but what is next? What are they trying to show us in terms of creating enough jobs for our people? Because at the moment, millions of South Africans are sitting at home. We need to see our people working and providing for their families and their households. And at the moment, all the tabled policies that have been tabled for our people seem too ambitious, because government is now planning in for 2030, 2050, of which it doesn't make sense because we are sitting with a problem right now. Hence, we are saying Cabinet must take action and show us better strategies that will work for our people and actually show economic development and growth.
Mtho, the pressure is on the consumers. I mean, you and I have been talking about this for a while now, and we'll keep on talking about it. We'll repeat it again. Investors are not putting in the money. Generally, business confidence is quite low. There's increased inflation. That is also, according to the Reserve Bank governor, placing a risk on the economy. Here's a question for Cosatu. In the next election, is the economy and the ability to implement policies going to be a deciding factor on whether or not you continue to support the ANC?
Yeah, no, good evening. Look, I mean, it is quite depressing news. The economy has shrunk by 0.7% last quarter. We'd actually had hoped, maybe against hopes, for a better report than that today, because we've seen in the last 2 quarters that unemployment has actually fallen by 2.1%. So that is some positive news. But perhaps it should not be unexpected when we've had a huge bout of load shedding. We've had significant fuel price increases, which have really suffocated the economy. We've had spiraling, increasing levels of inflation. But look, for us, it's not about having a plan. We've got an economic recovery and reconstruction plan, which was agreed to at NEDLAC in 2020, as Mtho was saying. It's about accelerating the implementation. That's why we're having these discussions at NEDLAC about accelerating implementation. So for us, it's about the fundamental basics. We need to have reliable and affordable energy. So that means fixing Eskom, enabling it to focus on maintenance, focus on bringing a new generation on board, which means you have to cut its debt burden. Yeah. We've got to look at measures to urgently intervene to save Transnet Freight Rail and Metro Rail so they can deliver their mining, their manufacturing, their agricultural goods to the markets on time and safely, so they can deliver passengers in the cities to work on time and safely, because those are key to jobs in those sectors, to revenue for the economy. Those are key to economic productivity across the urban economy. We've got to look to see more action by government to fix some of your most dysfunctional municipalities, because many companies are closing as a consequence of a lack of basic services being delivered to them. Government needs to do much more on corruption, which is bleeding the state of badly needed revenue, which could have been used to stimulate the economy. We need to invest more in SARS so we can tackle tax evasion, help replenish the government revenues, help push down the debt, enable it to invest in the economy and in public services. We need to see much more be done around corruption. But I think also, to be fair to government can do so much and must do much more. But we also need to see the private sector, the banks, the investment companies saying this is what they're going to do to help avoid retrenchments, to help create jobs. This is what they're going to do to pay workers a living wage, to help reduce the inequality gap, to help stimulate the economy, to support local procurement, local investments. And to be honest, business has been largely silent in this equation. They've constantly said, well, if government deals with the network blockages, they can come to the party. And it can't be like that. We need to deal with both things simultaneously. And you're right, Thabo. When it comes to election day, workers in South Africa, like workers across the world, will say, well, has unemployment fallen? Do I have more money in my pocket? Do I have electricity, basic services? Is life improving? If yes, then they will return the ruling party to power. If not, then it's going to be a real mission to convince voters to do so.
Let's look at what you're saying now. You're saying fix Eskom quickly. Do we need to fix Eskom quickly, or do we need to reduce our reliance on Eskom for electricity production? If you look at manufacturing, it fell 5.9%. If you look at agriculture, which, by the way, in the previous 2 financial years has been one of the best performing sectors, so to speak, and consistently growing. But because of the electricity situation, look at how they looked in quarter 2. Let's talk about that maybe a little bit. The question is, should we really honestly and openly start talking of a conversation where we are reducing our reliance on Eskom? I mean, as we speak, even now, we're talking stage 2 load shedding.
Look, we don't have a choice. We have to fix Eskom. Eskom transmits and distributes 100% of our electricity. It generates 95%. So whether you like Eskom or you don't like Eskom, we have to fix it, because we need to save jobs today and tomorrow. We don't have the luxury of time to think about 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the road. The crisis now is the economy of today and tomorrow, so we must fix Eskom. And I think everybody agrees with that. We must assist Eskom to reduce the debt burden. If Eskom can pay less on a debt burden, which is about 400 billion rand, it can have more money, more time to focus on maintenance, which is the most critical thing to get more generation on board. It will enable Eskom to focus more on building new generation capacity. That again that's the fundamental solution. Eskom has been doing some good work around reducing corruption, wasteful expenditure, but we need to see the National Prosecuting Authority also playing its role to arrest those, to prosecute those who have been implicated in corruption and so forth, to enable it to go forward. But we have to fix it. It is our greatest economic asset, but also right now it is our greatest economic threat. But we have to fix it. They don't have a choice. But that's also why we had drafted Eskom Social Compact as Cosatu and NEDLAC. And it speaks to a variety of interventions, about 35 in total. All of us have agreed to it, as government, as business, as labor. But really it's about, as Mtho saying, about accelerating implementation. What can we do to reduce the debt? We are pleased that the Minister of Finance has said by October, by the medium-term budget statement, there will be a debt relief plan put in place. That's great. We need to do it much faster because we just don't have the luxury of time. Yeah. Every time we have load shedding, it bleeds at least R1 billion a day from the economy. It's the most fundamental part of economic recovery, ensuring reliable and affordable electricity. But also, we have to also be honest. Eskom and government can do so much, but if we have businesses, if we have residents, if we have government departments, if we have municipalities which receive electricity and don't pay for the goods they receive, it's going to make it very, very difficult to rebuild Eskom. So we can't afford a scenario where municipalities owe 49 billion rand to Eskom, where departments owe billions of rands, or business companies are refusing to pay, yet they expect Eskom to deliver an essential good.
Mtho, the Eskom situation, it's not circumstantial. I mean, we can use it now in Q2 and say, oh, well, we had load shedding. It's not because it was just a unique circumstance. Yes, we went to stage 6 load shedding, but the truth is that the Eskom challenge is systemic. It is structural. It's been there for a while. Do we need to have a different conversation? Yes, Eskom is too big to fail at this particular point. But can we rely on it for energy security going forward?
Well, Thabo, you are right. It's a systemic problem. It's a systemic problem. It's been going on for some time, and I think we've been consistent, Saki, in saying that if you are really serious about fixing Eskom, you need to have greater accountability about the steps that are being taken to turn around Eskom. Some of the plans that could have probably saved us from the load shedding in the previous quarter were some announcements that were made in 2019. Their only problem was that they were not implemented timeously, and even when we had another crisis at Eskom, a new plan was developed. So you don't have consistency in oversight on the accountability, and therefore you never know really whether you're making any progress in the fixing of Eskom. I agree that Eskom has to be fixed because we believe that you do need a reliable public service in the energy space. A lot of South Africans depend on it. It is one of our national assets. So we need to fix it for our own sake because it is a very strategic entity that we need to protect. But we need to be more honest about where we are in terms of this. Because remember, even the latest plan around Eskom and the energy players and private sector players was really prompted by what happened as stage 6. But it's not the first time that we saw stage 6. The president had to fly into the country 2018-2019 when we first saw stage 6. And a plan was developed then that had been implemented properly, would have seen and be able to measure the turnaround of Eskom. However, as the private sector, we are saying we need to speed up any of those reforms where you're talking about private players joining in, because the 2 years that we've lost really in the implementation of the recovery plan could have probably assisted us. And this is actually, these numbers show the importance of being committed in executing very quickly any plans that you have. So we would say primarily, let's protect Eskom, let's fix Eskom. A lot of businesses still depend on Eskom, but also be very deliberate about how we measure the recovery of Eskom and how we support private players so that we have a diverse sources of energy and that will not put a strain on Eskom, but also should be complementary and should not be introduced to kill Eskom. But indeed, we can work together, but you need to be a bit smarter about how you protect Eskom and promote a private generation.
Private players, are you playing open cards? Are you being as honest as you need to be here? I mean, Matthew certainly seems to believe that you are not playing your part enough, except for always pointing at government, saying your government is not doing this or government is not doing that. Are you guys putting your money where your mouth is? Because when we look right now, investors are not putting money back into the economy. That is you private players.
Yeah, well, look, we have a lot of initiatives that various businesses talk about. The recovery of the economy, no matter how minimal it has been, when I say recovery, relatively speaking, that compared to 2019 numbers, all that has been driven just by private sector being allowed to trade again. So there's nothing miraculous that was done by government in the past 2 years to recover the economy. It was simply the private sector being allowed to go back to work and sustain the jobs that it has created, trade amongst itself, and obviously contribute to the taxes. So just on that, we are back on 2019 numbers, not because of any significant intervention by government, but simply by private sector going back to those businesses and saying, despite the losses, we remain committed to the South African economy, and at least we can recover the 2019 numbers. Moving forward, businesses will always invest in an environment that which is conducive and profitable. Businesses is not government. So we do hold government at a higher standard because it is also our government, and there are certain levers that only government can pull. And one of those levers, for instance, for us to accelerate this private sector play is, are we able to discuss openly the state of the public-private partnership framework at National Treasury? There's a lot of challenges there that are impeding on a greater investment by the private sector. And this is not only just in the national economy. Matthew makes reference of local municipalities. Most of the local municipalities, private sector players in those areas are unable to invest because the situation is so dire. The basic infrastructure has been shattered. So businesses just have to survive in those small spaces. So I do believe that we do put our money where our mouths are. And not only just on the headline-grabbing investments, but also on the small things that businesses do on a daily basis to be able to go through this post-pandemic era and recover those numbers from 2019, which in essence was just private sector play, and there was not a strategic intervention by government. So indeed, we are players, but I think a lot can be done, but we need a smarter reform and maybe talk to how do we build a social compact that is post-pandemic. Because also the problem that we've seen now is that the network platform has not been able to give us sustainable solutions, and maybe we must have a discussion about how do we strengthen this compact, knowing what we know now, and how do we reform some of those impediments, local, provincial, and national government levels. All
right, we'll come back and debate that a little bit more. Let's talk relief packages, Abigail. You welcome certainly the short-term relief packages, but there's a sense that you're saying we need to take a note and maybe do more in the area of skills and creating job opportunities. It's a sentiment that has been echoed by one economist as well. In fact, berating government, saying we just keep creating dependency instead of creating opportunities for people to be employed and to contribute into the economy. How do we do that? How do we move from a consumptionist government into a government that creates opportunity for people to give into this economy?
That is true, Thabo. As we also mentioned that we do welcome the relief packages that the government and the cabinet are trying to put in place for our people. But honestly, how long are our people going to depend on handouts that only last for like a year or 2 years at the most? Because how long will government always have the money to rescue our people wherever they feel they are stuck and going through the most with them in terms of the cost of living and inflation? Hence, we are saying our people need sustainability. In terms of sustainability, we are saying as much as we are always pointing the finger to government to create jobs and deliver on the promises that they give to our people, we are also calling on private sectors and stakeholders to try their best to invest into scarce skills, because we now have other countries leading in 4IR, artificial intelligence, STEM sectors that is our science, technology, and mathematics. Young people are leading in those sectors across the world. But what about our young people? Because we do have matriculants who are into TVET colleges this year. Some of them are going to graduate from universities, but they go back and stay at home and they get that relief package for a year or two. But then after that, what's next? Instead of always pointing the finger to another person, how about we create opportunities in terms of business funding? We do know that in terms of investments, it's a long stretch, but how about we take that leap of faith and give our young people the future they need? Because doing this today is us building a better tomorrow for South Africans. Hence, we are saying if we invest into our GDP, into our economy, people will grow in their jobs and they can be able to fend for themselves and their families. So all we are saying is that government must step in, invite stakeholders and potential private sectors to invest towards STEM sectors, 4IR, and look into going into those into jobs that support such things, so that we can develop our young people into thinking for tomorrow instead of today. Because we do know that we already have a lot of potential jobs around the country. But how do we allow young people to step in? How do we get them to be involved instead of providing them with potential temporary relief that will only sustain them for a few months or a year. We want long-term strategies. We want long-term solutions to the unemployment that we are facing. That's why we are saying government, all stakeholders, and everyone else who is able to step in and invest must help young people to set their foot into the right direction. And mostly we should invest into STEM sectors and skills.
Matthew, Mtho is talking of a promise that was made in 2019, and that promise is the investment in infrastructure, right? Because that was pointed to as what is going to grow this economy. And we've had investment summits and pledges have been made and so on and so forth. You look at this number consistently on the decrease in terms of activity. Construction, this time around 2.7% decrease. It's been looking like this consistently, at least for the past 10 terms that we have been, or quarters that we have been looking at. In fact, some are saying the number that is showing now is even below where the sector was sitting in 2010. And that should tell you generally about the state of our public infrastructure, which means we have not done anything for our public infrastructure. Hence, business is saying, well, I mean, all they've really done is just open doors. We are back to trading. There's really nothing that they have done for us at this particular point for us to be able to put money on the ground.
Yeah, look, I think it's a mixed bag. Obviously, the last 2.5 years is quite distorted because of COVID-19, the economic lockdown. So that obviously messed up all the figures. But the fact is we are in a crisis. We have an unemployment rate of 44%. We have been in a recession for quite some time. So we need to get out of it. You can't just simply go along with business as usual. On the infrastructure front, I mean, on a headline level, there is positive news. The government's committed to spending about 800 billion rand over these 3 years on infrastructure. But we need to see much more action. We need to see it be done quickly. We need to see projects taken off the ground, ribbons being cut, it really being accelerated. We're not seeing it enough. At times when government does do good work, they don't communicate it. They're terrible at communicating. So we have seen wind farms coming on board. Government doesn't communicate it. And if you communicate it, you'll help to send a positive message to locals, to South Africans, to workers, to businesses, to investors that things are improving. But we just get a sense from government that we don't move fast enough. We're not very good at time adults getting implementation moving. We're terrible at communicating. And those need to be dealt with because we just don't have the luxury of time. We had actually been quite, pleasantly surprised in the past 2 quarters to see unemployment rate falling over these two quarters by about 2.1%. If that could be sustained, we could begin to see unemployment being dealt with, but we can't rest on our laurels when we see today's GDP figures. But I think also to be fair to government, look, government will always be the largest source of finance for the economy. It's the largest procurer at 1 trillion rand. It's the largest funder of infrastructure projects, etc., and really must do much more around roads, around energy, around water and transport, housing and so forth, because many of those are fraying at the seams, especially in your rural areas. But we have to ask the private sector to come to the party. So we have amended Regulation 28 to allow pension funds to invest in infrastructure projects where it's attractive and makes sense for them. Let's hope the pension fund administrators will do so. Can we see the investment funds equally doing so? Can we see the big 5 banks putting money where the mouths are and doing so? Because often it says we don't see them moving. They look at where it's going to make a profit for them, which is fine. That's what they must do. But given the extraordinary crisis we're in, we really need to see businesses coming to the party. And they should be a little bit humble when the CEOs of the big 5 banks, or the big 4 banks, pay themselves 150,000, 200,000 rand every single day of the year. And yet they pay their cashiers a pittance, and often they've been retrenching these cashiers. We see in the mining sector a CEO of Sibanye getting 300 million rand in a single year, yet wanting to squabble with little mine workers for an extra 150 rand a month. We see the same kind of patterns in the retail sector, in the supermarket industry. So can the business colleagues come to the party, support a living wage for workers so they can buy the goods we produce? We can help reduce the partial wage gap. Can they look at alternatives to retrenchment? Can they look at supporting, as Abigail is saying, artisan programs, getting young people on board? Because government has been doing many of these things. They've provided the presidential employment stimulator, which has created 500,000 work opportunities for young people. Can business match those equations? So yes, business is right to hold government to account on its responsibilities, but as labor and as government, we also need to hold business to account on their responsibilities. It cannot be a one-way street. all of us have to make contributions.
I appreciate you all for coming on and your interventions tonight. Quick look at what you're saying on WhatsApp, 072-110-5584. Mtho Mandlambata saying the economy is in decline because of the problems of implementing proper strategic plans, SMEs empowerment, and failure to learn from BRICS countries on how they generate proper reforms. Appreciate you. Thank you very much for your engagement.